Hi learners, welcome to another mini lesson on the integumentary system. This time we're going to talk about the accessory skin organs. So the first accessory organ we're going to talk about is the sebaceous glands. So every hair follicle has a sebaceous gland that opens up into it. These glands secrete sebum, which is that oily, waxy substance, and it's composed of fatty acids, sugars, waxes, cholesterol, and dead cells. Ugh. The sebum is secreted by the gland and through the opening into the hair follicle. So excessive secretions of androgens, like think of puberty. Androgens are just those male sex hormones, and during puberty, this causes the increased production of sebum from those glands. This causes the follicles to potentially become blocked and form something called comedones, which are commonly known as blackheads. Whiteheads are just comedones that contain pus. A comedo is the singular form of that term. If that comedone stays closed, they'll form papules, which are just small, solid elevations of the skin. If they rupture, then bacteria can enter and cause infection, and that leads to pustules, which is basically a papule that contains pus. The presence of papules and pustules are classic signs of acne, which can affect about 85% of people aged 12 to 25. Another skin condition involving the sebaceous glands is seborrheic dermatitis. And in this condition, the glands of the face and the scalp produce a thicker secretion, thicker than the sebum, which results in yellow, greasy scales. In infants, this is kind of common, and we call it cradle cap. In adults, this can result in dandruff, which is basically just clumps of those keratinocytes when they stick together, and that's what we call dandruff. So let's look at the terminology here. Remember, when we break terms down, we start with the suffixes. So if we look at the suffix rhea, R-R-H-E-A, that means flow or excessive flow. So seborrhea is just excessive flow of sebum. And then in the second term, it actually has two suffixes. So rheic, the IC means pertaining to. So seborrheic is just pertaining to excessive flow of sebum. So that's the adjective form, pertaining to excessive flow of sebum. Pretty simple, right? All right, so let's look at hair, another another accessory skin organ. Hair originates from the epidermal cells of a hair follicle. Hair follicles are embedded deep within that dermis. Remember, the dermis is that living layer of the skin. As the cells grow and divide, they push the older cells upward and away from the source of nutrition and blood supply in the dermis. And as they move away, they become keratinized and die off. They lay dormant for a while, and then when new hair is formed, the old dead hair is pushed away. They drop off, they die, and they drop off. So new hair is constantly being formed, and the dead hair drops off, and that's why we shed hair. If you take an individual hair and look at that cross-section, the outermost layer, out here, the outermost layer is the cuticle. You've probably heard of the cuticle of the hair, and it's composed of a single layer of dead keratin cells. The next inner layer is the cortex. This is a densely packed layer of cells, and it contains a hardened form of keratin. So normally the word cortex means an outer layer of an organ. You'll learn more about that in A&P, but the outer layer of an organ is usually the cortex, but the cuticle of the hair actually covers the cortex. And this cortex gives hair its strength. And then there's an inner layer within that, which is called the medulla, and that's composed of loosely arranged cells, and it contains a more flexible type of keratin that gives hair some flexibility. The texture of your hair depends on the shape of the hair shaft. So you can see on the left, those hair shafts are circular, and on the right, those hair shafts are more oval. So a hair shaft that is round will result in straight hair, and hair shafts that are oval will result in wavy hair. Hair color is derived from the amount and type of melanin present in hair cells. So melanin is the black pigment that's found in skin, hair, and eyes. So the absence of melanin, if we have no melanin, you'll end up with albinism. And I have a picture in a couple more slides here. Something called eumelanin is the darker form of melanin, and pheomelanin is the lighter form of melanin. So someone with black or dark brown hair would have a lot of eumelanin in the cortex, and someone with brown melanin would have a moderate amount of eumelanin, and someone with blonde hair would have very little eumelanin. Someone with red hair would have mostly pheomelanin with a little eumelanin. Someone with gray hair would have little or no melanin at all. So there, in that picture, you see a lot of different types of hair, colors, and textures. All right, so let's do a little terminology review. So remember, cortex means the outer layer, the outer layer of an organ. In hair, we have the cuticle, but really it's the outer layer. So what's the root? Which one's the noun? Which one's the singular? Which one's the plural? So core, C-O-R, is the root term meaning covering or outer covering. So the noun is cortex. It's also the singular form. The plural form is cortices, and the adjective form is cortical. So if you have trouble with the plural form, remember, go back to, I think, chapter 2 that covered plural forms. The plural form is cortices, and the adjective form is cortical. Okay, let's talk about a couple of disorders. Alopecia is the term that means hair loss, and there's a few types of alopecia. Androgenic alopecia is the term for male pattern baldness. Andro means male, so androgenic alopecia is what we commonly refer to as male pattern baldness. Alopecia areata refers to patchy hair loss. Alopecia totalis refers to complete loss of scalp hair. And alopecia universalis is complete loss of body hair, so hair all over the body, including eyebrows, eyelashes, nose hair, and complete loss of all body hair. And this is a picture of somebody with albinism. So this condition, remember, results from the melanocytes. They completely fail to produce melanin, so there's a lack of pigment in the hair, skin, and eyes. And the default color for eyes is blue, so they have very, very pale blue eyes. Okay, let's look at sweat glands, another accessory organ. Your book is a little confusing here. Your book states that merocrine glands are another name for eccrine glands, and that's not actually correct. Merocrine is a classification of glands that include eccrine glands, but it also includes salivary glands, pancreatic glands, and a few others. So this type of gland secretes, or excretes, I should say, excretes the products, whatever it is, sweat, saliva, digestive enzymes, through a duct or a tube and then onto the surface of the organ. So an eccrine gland is a type of merocrine gland, and it's one that secretes sweat through a duct or a tube onto the surface of the skin. So remember, that's different from a sebaceous gland. A sebaceous gland was attached to a hair follicle and secreted sebum through that hair follicle onto the surface of the skin. So there's a little bit of a difference there. So eccrine glands are one type of sweat glands, and the body has millions of them all over the surface of the skin. And there's higher concentrations on the palms, the soles, and the forehead. And the main function of these eccrine glands is to produce sweat, which evaporates and cools the body. Sweat is 99% water, but it also contains electrolytes, mostly sodium, some waste products of cell metabolism, mostly sodium, but sweat is mostly composed of 99% water. The medical term for sweating is diaphoresis, and it can indicate a medical emergency, something like a heart attack or a myocardial infarction, if the person is not out, running a mile or jogging up and down steps. In the absence of physical activity, if somebody is sweating profusely, it can indicate a medical emergency. The second type of sweat glands are apocrine glands, and these glands are found in the axilla, the armpits, and in the genital regions around the nipples. These apocrine glands produce a thicker, cloudy secretion that can interact with normal bacteria on the skin, and this produces the classic body odor smell. These glands are similar to sebaceous glands because they lead directly to a hair follicle. And apocrine glands respond to increased stress, fear, and sexual stimulation. They release chemicals called pheromones. And you're probably familiar with the term pheromones. So that term can be broken down into the root hormone, meaning to excite or stimulate, and the prefix "pher," meaning to carry. The HOR from hormone is dropped to make it easier to pronounce. All right, so let's look at other types of glands here. Ceruminous glands are found in the external ear canal, and they produce a thick secretion that combines with sebum and dead cells to produce cerumen, which is the medical term for earwax. And cerumen has an important function in protecting and waterproofing the ear canal. And then finally, mammary glands are a modified type of sweat gland, and they are obviously important in the reproductive system, so we're going to discuss them more in Chapter 8. We don't need to discuss them here. And although not covered in your book, there are several disorders of sweat glands, which are kind of interesting. There's something called ectodermal dysplasia, which is a group of disorders that affect the hair, teeth, nails, and sweat glands. Cystic fibrosis affects the sweat glands, although it's best known to affect a person's breathing. It also affects the sweat glands because they get clogged up too. And then there's conditions like bromhidrosis, which is foul-smelling body odor, and chromhidrosis, which is a condition of secreting colored sweat, which means, yes, you could potentially have red, green, blue, yellow, or even black sweat. So I'm just going to throw that out there. So the last section of the text covers the nails. So technically they are part of the integumentary system. The nails are formed by dead keratinized cells that are packed tightly together, and the nails are formed in the stratum corneum of the epidermis. Nails grow very slowly, only about 1 millimeter per week. New cells are formed in the nail matrix at the base of the nail, and this area is embedded in the nail fold under the cuticle, as you see in the picture. Let's see. The root word onych, O-N-Y-C-H, means nail. So if you see terms with that root in it, O-N-Y-C-H, you're looking at something related to the nail. You can see the medical term for cuticle is eponychium. So if we break it down, the um suffix ending tells us it's a noun. Epi is the prefix meaning above or upon, and onych means nail. So here you'll notice we drop the I in the prefix epi just to make it easier to pronounce. So the cuticle is the eponychium. We just drop the epi, we drop the I from epi to make it easier to pronounce. Let's see, the largest portion of the nail rests on the nail bed. That's the living layer of the epidermis. So that's the stratum basale, the stratum spinosum, and the stratum granulosum. So you can see all of that nice pink nail bed underneath the nail. Whew, okay, almost done. The last portion of this section deals with diseases of the nails. More than half of all nail disorders are caused by fungal infections. Those fungal infections are referred to as onychomycosis. So if you break this term down, onychomycosis, there you go, there's a nice iffy picture. Onychomycosis, break it down, osis means condition of, and we have two root terms here. So onycho refers to nail, myco refers to fungus. So be careful not to confuse myco with myo. Remember, myo means muscle. Fungi like nice, warm, moist environments. So things like warm shoes. So toenails are really prone to fungal infections, or prolonged submersion in dishwater, like people who work in restaurants are prone to fungal infections in their hands. Artificial fingernails, where moisture can get trapped under the artificial fingernails, things like that, make nails especially prone to fungal infections. A paronychia is a bacterial infection. Usually this is a staph infection that can occur along the base or the side of the nail. This area becomes red, painful, swollen, and is especially common in people who chew or bite their nails. Usually requires topical antibiotics unless it becomes very severe, then the person may need oral antibiotics. In healthcare, We can look at patients and assess their nails that can tell us something about their overall systemic health. So our nails can tell us a lot about what's going on with their overall health. We can look at a person's nails and tell what's going on with their overall health. Clubbing of the nails can indicate hypoxia or low oxygen levels. Brittle or spoon-shaped nails can indicate anemia. Dark bands along the tips of the nails, we call that Terry's nails, can indicate congestive heart failure, diabetes, or liver disease. We can also assess circulation by pressing on the nails. We look for something called capillary refill. We press on the tips of the nails and see how long it takes for the white to turn back to pink. If it's delayed, then the person's circulation may be impaired. Okay, so that's it. Our next lesson will be on burns and injuries to the skin, but that's all I have for the accessory organs. Thank you for your attention.